The envelope had been sitting on my kitchen counter for 11 days. I kept walking past it, making coffee, walking past it, feeding my cat, walking past it, getting ready for work, walking past it. I knew what was inside. I'd been the one to request it after all. I just wasn't ready to make it real. But on the 12th morning, I picked it up. I sat down at my small kitchen table, the one I'd bought myself at a garage sale 2 years ago, and refinished on a Sunday afternoon when I had nothing else to do and too many feelings to sit with, and I opened it. The papers were exactly what I'd asked for, clean, official, notarized. I folded them back up, put them in my purse, and went to my mother's house for Sunday dinner like I did every week. Before I tell you what happened that night, I need you to understand something. I'm not the kind of person who plans things like this. I'm not strategic or cold or calculating. I'm the kind of person who cries at dog food commercials and keeps birthday cards in a shoebox under my bed. I'm the kind of person who showed up to that Sunday dinner every single week for 6 years, even after everything, because some part of me still believed that if I just kept showing up, something would eventually shift. It never did. My name is Simone. Wait, no. Let me start over, because that's not even close to the right place to begin. My mother bought that house in Decatur, Georgia, in 1998, the year I turned 3. My father had just left, not dramatically, not with a fight, just quietly and completely. The way some men do, and she was 26 years old with 2 daughters, and a cashier job at the grocery store, and somehow, she scraped together enough for a down payment on a small brick ranch with a magnolia tree in the front yard. I grew up climbing that tree. I scraped my knees on its bark and cried on its roots and read every book I ever loved sitting in its branches. That house was the one solid thing in our lives. Mom worked doubles, took night classes, eventually became a licensed practical nurse, and then, years later, an RN. She built something real. And she built it for us. Me and my older sister. What I didn't understand until I was much older was that she'd been building it specifically for my sister, not for me. I know how that sounds. I know people hear that and think, you're exaggerating, you're being dramatic. All parents have favorites, but they love all their kids the same. I used to think that too. I used to make excuses. My sister was older. My sister had different needs. My sister went through a hard time in high school. My sister's name is Rochelle, and she is 4 years older than me, and I love her, and I need you to know that this story is not about hating her. This is about what our mother did. What she kept doing. What she chose over and over in ways that were so small and so constant that I almost didn't notice until I was drowning in it. When I was 16, my mother co-signed a car loan for Rochelle. That's fine, Rochelle needed a car. But when I turned 17 and got a part-time job at a sandwich place downtown and saved for 8 months to buy a used Honda Civic, my mother refused to co-sign because she said my credit wasn't worth risking her name on. Even though I had never had a credit card in my life, and the whole point was to start building something. I ended up paying a 22% interest rate because I had to get a loan without her. I paid that car off by working weekends through my entire first year of college. When I graduated high school, 3rd in my class, full academic scholarship to Georgia State, my mother threw a small party. When Rochelle graduated community college 2 years later with an associate's degree she'd taken 6 years to finish, my mother threw a catered event in the backyard with a DJ and a custom cake and invited everyone she'd ever met. I told myself it didn't matter. I was grown. I didn't need parties. When Rochelle had her first baby at 24, my mother took 6 weeks of leave from work to help her. When I had a health scare at 26, a biopsy that turned out to be benign but terrified me for 3 weeks, my mother called once, asked if I needed anything, and never followed up. I told myself she was busy. When Rochelle got divorced at 30 and moved back into the house with her 2 kids, my mother put her name on the deed. Rochelle's name, on the deed. For security, she said. In case something happens to me. I didn't find out until 6 months later, when I casually mentioned to my mother that I was thinking about finally buying a condo of my own, and maybe she could help me understand some of the paperwork, and she said, "This is exact. I will never forget this," she said. "Well, you know the house will go to Rochelle anyway. You're more independent. You don't need it the way she does." I was 31 years old. I sat with that for a long time. Here's the thing about growing up feeling like the second choice child. You spend a lot of years trying to logic your way out of it. You make spreadsheets in your head. You try to be fair to everyone, including the person who isn't being fair to you. You say things like she doesn't mean it and she loves me in her own way, and it could be worse. And, sometimes when you're really deep in it, you actually convince yourself that the person who needs less love is you. That you were born with a lower requirement for it. That your independence, the thing you cultivated specifically because no one was coming to take care of you, is actually a personality defect that justifies your exclusion. I'm in therapy now. I know what that is. I know what it's called. But I didn't know any of that at 31. At 31, I just felt the familiar sting and swallowed it down and said, "Okay, Mom, I understand." I did not understand. What I did instead was go home and spend 4 hours doing research on Georgia property law. This is the part where I need to tell you about my father. My biological father left when I was 3, yes, but my grandfather, my mother's father, was the man who actually raised me. Pop, I called him. He was a retired postal worker from Albany, Georgia, and he drove up to see us every other weekend until he got too old to drive, and then we drove down to see him, and he taught me to fish, and to change a tire, and to make his mother's peach cobbler from scratch. He died when I was 28, and I cried for 6 months in small private moments that I didn't share with anyone. Pop never had much, but he had a small piece of land, about 2 acres, outside Albany that had been in the family since his grandfather. Nothing on it but some old trees and a lot of Georgia red clay and a view of the sky that I have never seen anywhere else. He paid the taxes on it every year like it was sacred, because to him it was. When Pop died, his will left that land to me, not to my mother, not to Rochelle, to me. Specifically, by name, with a note in the will that said he knew I would take care of it. My mother never mentioned the land. I figured she'd accepted it. It was only 2 acres of undeveloped land in a small town. It wasn't worth fighting over. Except that 3 years later, I got a letter from the Albany City County Tax Office addressed to my mother, forwarded to my address by mistake, because the county had my contact information from when I'd registered the deed. The letter was about delinquent property taxes. Delinquent, as in unpaid, for 3 years. As in, my mother had somehow gotten herself listed as a tax contact on property that legally belonged to me, and she had not paid a single dollar of taxes on it. I called the county office. I explained that I was the legal owner. They confirmed that the deed was in my name, but that the tax correspondence had been redirected at some point, and they weren't sure why. I asked them to correct it and gave them my address. Then I paid the back taxes, not a huge amount, about $100, and I sat very quietly for a long time. I didn't confront my mother. I didn't ask her to explain. I just filed that information away. And then, about a year after that, the thing that actually broke something in me happened. My mother called me on a Thursday evening, which was unusual. We talked on Sundays, before dinner. Thursday calls meant something was wrong. She told me that Rochelle was going through some financial difficulties. The details are complicated, but the short version is, Rochelle had taken out a second mortgage on my mother's house. The house where both their names were on the deed now. Without my mother's full knowledge of the terms, and they were behind on payments, and my mother needed help. She needed $50,000. I want to be very precise about what happened in my body in that moment. I felt something go cold, starting in my chest and spreading outward. Not anger exactly, something quieter and more final than anger, like a door closing. I asked her how much she had helped Rochelle with financially over the years. Not accusatorially, genuinely. As if I were taking inventory, she said, "That's not relevant right now. Your sister needs help." I asked her whether she had ever at any point helped me the same way she'd helped Rochelle. Long pause. "You never needed it," she said. "You were always the strong one." I was the strong one because no one gave me a choice. I was strong because she made me strong by removing the option of being held. And now that I had built something, a good salary, savings, a small investment portfolio I'd put together by reading every personal finance book I could find in my 20s. Now she wanted to treat my strength as a resource available to the family. After it had never been treated as something deserving of the family's investment, I said, "Mom, I have to think about this." She said, "What is there to think about? She's your sister." I said, "I'll call you Sunday." I did not sleep that night. I lay in my bed in my apartment on the east side of Atlanta, and I stared at the ceiling, and I thought about the magnolia tree. I thought about climbing it as a kid, how the bark was rough under my hands and the branches were thick and I always felt safe up there. I thought about how I had never, in 32 years, felt as safe inside that house as I did in that tree outside it. I thought about Pop. I thought about the 2 acres in Albany. I thought about $20 in back taxes and a redirected mailing address. I called a real estate attorney on Friday morning. I called her because a colleague had used her for a property dispute and said she was thorough and clear. Her name was not important to this story. What mattered was that she picked up, she listened, and she said 7 words that changed the frame of everything. "What do you actually want to keep?" I thought about it. I said, "I want to keep the land." she said. Then let's make sure it's protected. Over the next few weeks I did things I had never done before. I filed a formal notice with the county confirming my sole ownership of the Albany land. I had the property independently appraised. It had gone up in value significantly because a development company had been buying acreage in that area. 2 acres of land I'd inherited now appraised at a little over $180,000. I set up a land trust with my name as sole beneficiary. I changed the tax correspondence address, formally and in writing. I did all of this quietly. I told no one. And then I kept going to Sunday dinner. This is the part people always find strange. Why did I keep going? Part of it was that I still loved my mother. I know that's hard to understand. I know it sounds like something a person says to explain a thing they can't explain. But I did love her. I loved the version of her that existed in my memory. The woman who worked doubles so we could have Christmas presents, who taught me to braid my own hair, who cried at my high school graduation even while she was planning Rochelle's bigger party. That woman was real. She was just not the whole picture. The other part was that I needed to know something. I needed to know if she was going to ask me again. And I needed to know what I was going to do when she did. She asked me again 5 weeks later. Not Sunday dinner. She called on a Wednesday. Rochelle was there in the background. I could hear her voice. My mother said the bank had sent a notice. She said they needed an answer. She said, I know it's a lot to ask, but this is family. I said, Mom, I need to say something to you, and I need you to hear it. She said, okay. I said, you put Rochelle's name on your deed for security. You said it was because you didn't know what the future held. I understand that, but you never once offered me the same security. You never once looked at what I had and said, let me help protect that. You redirected the tax correspondence on Pop's land he left to me specifically. And now you're asking me for $50,000 to clean up a situation that happened to the house that has her name on it, but not mine. I'm not saying no to save money, I said. I'm saying no, because I have spent 32 years being the strong one, and I'm tired of my strength being the thing this family withdraws from instead of deposits into. My mother's voice, when she finally spoke, was not the voice I was expecting. I expected guilt, or softness, or maybe tears. Instead, she was sharp, cold in a way I'd rarely heard from her. She said, I don't know what you think happened to you in this family, but I always gave you what you needed. You turned out fine. I said, that's not the same as being loved equally. She said, if that's how you feel, then I don't know what else I can do for you. I said, I'm not asking you to do anything for me, Mom. I'm asking you to see me. Another long silence. And then, I think it would be better if you didn't come this Sunday. I need some space from this conversation. That was the moment. Right there. That was the thing I had somehow known was coming. In the way you know a storm is coming even when the sky still looks clear. I said, okay. And then I said, I want you to know that I love you. And I want you to know that I hope things work out with the house. She hung up. I put my phone face down on my desk. I sat for a moment. Then I opened my laptop and sent a follow-up email to my attorney, confirming that all the paperwork for the land trust was finalized. It was. The weeks after that were strange. I kept waiting to feel devastated. I'd spent so long being afraid of this, being cast out, being told I wasn't needed, being the one who walked away, that I thought when it finally happened it would feel like falling. Instead it felt like landing. Like I had been hovering 3 inches above solid ground for years and my feet had finally touched down. Rochelle texted me twice. The first text was, Mom told me what you said. I can't believe you would do this to her. The second, she's really struggling. I thought you were better than this. I didn't respond to either, not because I was being cold. Because I had said everything I had to say to the person who needed to hear it, and I had nothing left to explain to anyone else. My aunt, my mother's younger sister, who I'd always been close to, called me about 3 weeks later. She wasn't calling to take sides. She just called to check on me, which is the kind of thing she does because she is genuinely a decent person. I told her what happened. Not the whole thing, but enough. I told her about the land, about the taxes, about the $50,000, about what my mother had said. My aunt was quiet for a long time. Then she said, she used to do the same thing to me, you know. When we were growing up, I was always the responsible one. I hadn't known that. I kept waiting for her to see it. My aunt said, eventually I stopped waiting and just started living my life. It doesn't mean you don't love her. It just means you can't keep holding a door open for someone who only knocks when they want something. I wrote that down. I have it on a note card on my refrigerator now. About 2 months after the phone call, I drove down to Albany for the first time in 3 years. The land looked the same. Same red clay soil, same scatter of loblolly pines along the back edge, same unobstructed sky. I walked the whole perimeter. It took about 20 minutes. At the far corner there was a small wooden marker that Pop had put there decades ago. Just his initials and a year, burned into a piece of wood with a soldering iron. I crouched down and looked at it for a long time. I thought about what I wanted to do with it. I'd had some preliminary conversations with a nonprofit that builds affordable housing in rural Georgia. 2 acres was enough for 2, maybe 3 small homes. Nothing fancy, just solid, stable places for people who needed them. The kind of place my mother had once fought to give us. I hadn't made any decisions yet, but I liked thinking about it. My mother and I have not spoken since the phone call. That's been about 7 months now. I don't know what she expected to happen. Whether she thought I'd come back in a week or a month, or eventually just collapse back into the pattern because that's what I'd always done. I don't know if she's told people I abandoned her. I don't know if she and Rochelle worked out the mortgage situation. I genuinely hope they did. What I know is this. I am 32 years old, and I live alone in an apartment I furnished myself, and I have a cat named after a character in a book I loved in high school, and I have 2 acres of land in Albany, Georgia that my grandfather left me, because he knew I would take care of it, and I do take care of it. I pay the taxes every year, on time, every January, without being asked. I used to think the hardest thing would be letting go of the hope that things would change. I used to think that was the grief, the losing of the hope. But it turns out the grief is shorter than the hope. The hope was the thing that cost me something every single day. The grief was just a season. It had a beginning and a middle and slowly an end. Someone asked me once, maybe 6 months before all of this happened, what I would do if I had to choose between keeping peace with my family and keeping my self-respect. At the time I said I didn't know. I know now. I never wanted the land, not really. It was never about the land. It was about what it meant that Pop saw something in me worth passing down. It was about what it meant that my mother didn't. All I ever wanted was a mother who saw the same thing Pop did. She didn't. And I've had to learn how to carry that, without letting it become the thing that defines me. Some days are harder than others. But most days, when I drive to work and the sun is coming up over the Atlanta skyline and the radio is playing something good and my coffee is exactly right, I feel something that I don't have a better word for than free. Not happy necessarily, not healed, not all the way, just free. And for right now, that's enough.